Correct. 131. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to approve minutes first, and I know Deborah, as always, has done a good job with the minutes from February 23rd, 24th, March 10th, and 11th. And I'm assuming if anybody had comments or concerns, they've already been turned in, but just in case you haven't, let's go ahead and I'll take a motion from Representative Clark to pass out the minutes as written, and a second from my Vice Chair, Representative Thomas. Further discussion on the minutes, anything that anybody saw or changes? Not seeing anything. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. All right, we're rolling now. Let's keep going. Hearing on Senate Bill 32. Nick, you have the floor, and you can give us a brief introduction before we get into testimony. Thank you, Nick.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Committee, Senate Bill 32 deals with dual and concurrent enrollment at high schools and high school students taking college courses. This is known as the Kansas Challenge to Secondary School Students Act. And right now, current law prohibits a school district from paying for the tuition or providing transportation to students who are dually or concurrently enrolled. So what this bill would do is it would authorize school districts at the discretion of the local Board of Education to pay all or a part of the tuition fees and costs for any high school student who is dually or concurrently enrolled at a post-secondary educational institution. Just kind of briefly through the sections of the bill. Section 1 is a new section of law. This would require each post-secondary educational institution that accepts dually or concurrently enrolled students to submit an annual report to the Kansas Board of Regents. This report would provide information on the numbers of students, the number of students who are completing the courses, and the differences in regular tuition charged versus the tuition rate charged for dually or concurrently enrolled students, and the amount of tuition that school districts are paying for those students. The Board of Regents would be required to submit a summary report to the Kansas Legislature on or before February 15 of each year. Sections 2 and 3 are kind of technical cleanup. Section 4 amends some definitions in there. The main one is the definition of student, and the main change in the definition of student, these are students who are eligible for dual or concurrent enrollment, would add an additional requirement that a student must have an individualized plan of study or an IEP, an individualized education program, to participate. Section 5 would amend current law allowing the Board of Education of any school district and an eligible post-secondary institution to enter into cooperative agreements regarding this dual or concurrent enrollment. And what this section would do is it would provide that the cooperative agreement must also require the post-secondary educational institution to notify the student or the student's parent or guardian if the course the student is enrolling in is not a system-wide transfer course that's approved by the Kansas Board of Regents. And as a result, the student may not receive credit if that student were to transfer on to another in-state post-secondary educational institution. Additionally, Section 5, as I already said, would authorize the Board of Education of a school district to pay all or a portion of the amount of tuition charged by the college for dual or concurrent enrollment. Section 6 would provide that students would be responsible for any tuition fees and related costs that are not paid for by the district. This subsection would also authorize for the payment of transportation for these students. It would also require that students be granted high school credit for completion of those courses, and also require that students remain in good standing at the eligible post-secondary educational institution or show satisfactory academic progress. The final subsection in Section 6 would clarify that the provisions of this act would not apply to enrollment in career technical education courses or programs that are receiving financial assistance and already receiving state financial assistance or funding pursuant to 723810 or 723819, one of those of which is Senate Bill 55 or 155 that I'm sure you've heard about from years past. Section 7 of the bill is kind of the final section. What this section would do in current law, tuition waivers are granted for eligible foster children who enroll in Kansas post-secondary educational institutions. These tuition waivers are in place for these students generally after they complete high school. And what this section of this bill would do is it would amend that definition of an eligible foster child to also waive the tuition for students who are dually or concurrently enrolled. Foster children who are dually or concurrently enrolled would be on the same footing as they are once they graduate from high school. And finally, the effective date of this bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book. And I'd be happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
Nick, just as a reminder, last year, this is one of the bills that just didn't get finished and sent and signed by the governor because of COVID. Is that correct?
I was just pulling that up, Mr. Chair. Give me a second. I'll
Okay.
update the committee with that here in a little bit.
I'm getting a few nods that that's the case, but I just wanted to confirm that. So you can confirm that and we'll move on to other questions. But committee, is there further questions for Nick? We'll stall for a second.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct. I believe last year, House Bill 2510, which had other various provisions in it as well, contained these provisions, these dual and concurrent enrollment provisions. And that bill passed the House. It looks like the conference committee report was adopted on a vote of 110-3 for that entire bill.
Okay. Further questions for Nick? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and get into testimony. And we have 6 proponents. And so to the proponents, I would just encourage you that we do have your written testimony. So kind of stick to the highlights because we are going to try to work a couple bills after the 2 hearings are complete. But that being said, say what you need to say. First up is Dr. Blake Flanders. Is Blake online?
I am online. Can you hear me?
All
okay?
right. We can hear you. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you and good afternoon, Chair Hubert and members of the committee. And thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony in support of Senate Bill 32. Many times dual enrollment programs allow high school students to take courses and receive both high school and many times college credits. So this has been really good for high school students. I want to thank Chair Hubert for serving on our Future of Higher Education Council this last year. And as you remember, we heard reports on the value of concurrent enrollment. Those students that participate and complete those courses are more likely to meet college readiness benchmarks, lower likelihood of placement into remedial English or math. They generally have higher first-year grade point averages and higher 4- and 6-year college completion rates. So we want to encourage as many students as possible that are eligible and ready to access these courses. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony and would stand for any questions.
And we're going to hold questions to the end, but it was an honor to serve on your Future of Higher Education Committee. It was a good learning experience for me. Next up is Matt Lindsay. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Matt Lindsay. I'm the president of the Kansas Independent College Association. I represent and work on behalf of the 20 accredited not-for-profit colleges in the state of Kansas. And we come speaking separately from what you heard from Dr. Flanders, almost entirely because we are not within the coordinated system of the public universities. But I come before you to say we are full-throated in our support of this as well. We also share what you heard from Dr. Flanders, an appreciation for the importance of concurrent and dual credit. We have a number of partnerships with our local USDs, with private not-for-profit colleges. And in fact, one of the ones that triggered, I think, this effort is an effort between Friends University and Wichita Public School District that we're really proud of what's going on there. For us, about 7% of our enrollment this year, about 1,000 students, a little more, is dual credit with or early college high school students. That's down significantly this year for obvious COVID reasons. We expect that to bounce right back. And so we're really grateful that we were included in the language here as a partner in this effort. So with that, I will yield to questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Heather Morgan. Welcome to the committee, Heather.
Heather Morgan, I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Community College Trustees Association. We're here to support this bill. I just wanted to highlight a couple of provisions that are really important for the Kansas Community College system. We serve a tremendous amount of dual and concurrent enrollment students at our community colleges. The transportation section of this bill that allows the K-12 school district to transport the student to our campuses is really important. For our most at-risk and needy students, transportation is often the barrier that keeps them from getting to campus. So not only will this bill allow the school district to help their most impoverished students, which today their families aren't able to pay for a dual or concurrent enrollment class, so this USD will be able to pick that up. They'll also be able to transport the student if that is a barrier. In this bill, the bill also allows foster care students who are in junior or senior year to receive free dual and concurrent enrollment classes. We have a foster care tuition waiver in the state. A lot of people don't know that that is not funded. The colleges waive the tuition for foster care students. I wanted to point that out. And the last thing is, in the Senate version of the bill, you'll see a number of amendments. Those were brought by us really as technical cleanup for two reasons. One, it talks about the transferability of credits. It's really important that a dual or concurrent class will transfer into the student's either associate's or bachelor's degree. And so we will make sure that the student understands if the course they are taking will transfer to another in-state university. We wouldn't know necessarily if an out-of-state institution would take that class. And then the second part of this is currently Senate Bill 155, which for new people, don't go look for Senate Bill 155. It's like 155 from 7 or 8 years ago, which frequently I have legislators looking for it. We still call it Senate Bill 155. It is where the career and technical education classes are covered in full by the state of Kansas for those students. So we wanted to be clear that there are some technical education classes which are not eligible for Senate Bill 155 that a USD may want to pay for. And so the amendment language is just clarifying that. And I'll be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Next up is Terrell Davis. Welcome to the committee, Terrell.
Chairman Hubert and committee members, thank you so much. I'm going to cut my remarks down, actually. We've heard about the college to career prison pipeline, that occurs in many classrooms. We've heard about the need for more college students of color to graduate from our four-year degrees. We've even heard about the great argument that many students are selecting to not attend college because of fear of college debt. Well, here is a program that combats all of those potential concerns and sends students who are in the bubble from the classroom to college. These students are not IB or AP students, nor are they AVID, advanced via individual determination students. These are students who are in the middle. They have potential, but they could easily fall through the cracks. They sit in classrooms making anywhere between a 2.5 to a 3.0 GPA. They get in trouble from time to time, not because they're bad kids, but because they're bored. They walk the halls going to class, but not too quickly. Because they haven't realized or have been told that this class could change their lives. These kids are in the bubble, and this program captures them and inspires them to see that they can become whoever they desire to be. They are good enough. This program changes the trajectory, and we need you to help us in passing Senate Bill 32 to give these kids a chance to experience college and to catch the college learning bug. The program I'm mentioning is the Early College Program in USD 259. This program is now in year 2 and has 98 students enrolled. We are currently enjoying a 90% success rate with only 2 students out of 100 who enrolled having to drop out. Next year, our plan is for the original cohort to start taking college classes at Friends University. And if you pass this bill, we would love to finalize a plan for a second program to launch at Wichita State University. We are serious about removing obstacles and helping students to conquer remaining obstacles on their way to obtaining a college degree and a career of their choice. We are not asking for additional funds or additional money. We are asking for local authority to pay for tuition for these students. Our goal is to continue to raise money necessary to cover tuition, but we would like the statutory authority to use district funds to pay what is not raised. By granting us this authority, districts will be able to negotiate tuition with local colleges and universities and/or community colleges and technical schools for students. Local control allows districts to partner with local higher education schools to provide the best program for students and families. In closing, Booker T. Washington says, "If you want to lift yourself, lift someone else." As we look at lifting our nation, our state, and our communities from the COVID-19 pandemic, we must look at lifting all students to the best they can be. Our superintendent reminds us in Wichita that public education is an economic driver. Here is an opportunity to improve the lives of students, their families, and our communities. We stand in support of Senate Bill 32, and I will stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Terrell, and thank you for your efforts for our kids in Wichita. Next up is Mark Tallman. Welcome to the committee. Mark, haven't got to see you for a while. It's always good to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I am Mark Tallman on behalf of the Kansas Association of School Boards. Delighted to be here today. You'll be delighted to know I'll be extremely brief. I think the previous people have really outlined the advantages of this bill. Would just stress, this is not mandatory. It's another tool that local boards can use if they choose to help support programs that we think have demonstrated a lot of success. Take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mark. Next up is Jessica Lucas. Welcome to the committee, Jessica.
Thank you, committee. Jessica Lucas here today on behalf of the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. I appreciate the voices that have already spoken to you from the education community. I am here today to express my support from the business community. And I will also note that in your testimony, you have written testimony from the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. This has been a bill that the Wichita Chamber has supported in previous years. Are very hopeful we will see this get across the line. It's important to the men and women that are employing folks in the South Central region. And again, as Mark noted, is another tool that will help kids get into the workforce, and our businesses need skilled individuals who have had that training. And if the barrier is cost and the schools are willing to pay for it, let's make that happen. So with that, I appreciate your time today and would stand for questions at the appropriate time.
All right. And as we get into questions, I will also note that we have proponent testimony from the State Board of Education, Tina Horst and Ben Jones, and also from the Kansas Chamber, Eric Stafford, and neutral testimony from Tanya Keys from the Kansas Department for Children and Families. So, committee, questions for any or all of the proponents? Representative Pascal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have more of a comment. I worked at Johnson County Community College for nearly 9 years and worked extensively with parents and students and high school counselors enrolling students into dual and concurrent credit classes, and as well have a college admissions advising business where what we really try to focus on is knowing what you're doing. And I must say I love this bill, everything about this bill. In section 5, number 4, page 3, lines 22 to 28, it talks about the requirement that the eligible post-secondary educational institution shall notify the student or the student's parent or guardian if the course does not transfer, part of the SWT. And I checked in with some of my colleagues who are still at Johnson County Community College, and they kind of agree with my concerns. I have 2 concerns. The first is that that's kind of difficult, because students enroll multiple semesters for these classes, and so the mechanism to beep, this class doesn't count, beep, that is not going to transfer, is a little challenging. But more so, I would posit that after they enroll in the class is too late. It should be part of their course planning before they enroll in the course. The second concern that I have is that a lot of our students are pursuing wonderful technical careers as they're in high school, and if they get a notice every semester that they enroll in one of these technical courses that is going to work towards their associate's degree or their certification in a career technical progression, that they're going to get this notification that it doesn't transfer, and I think we might be sending a message that somehow what they're pursuing is less than. That if it's not 4-year worthy, then it's less than. So I would just throw it out to the proponents to give me a little bit of feedback, because my recommendation would be that we look at changing the notification to students upon acceptance for enrollment. That is part of their acceptance email or letter. It advises them that courses may or may not be system-wide transfer courses, that they should refer to the KBOR website before enrollment, and also consult with their high school counselor and or post-secondary academic advisor regarding their future plans before each course enrollment.
And I would encourage you to talk to Nick so that
I
we
did.
can look
We have
at.
something working on that.
Okay,
So,
but
I
then
wanted
go ahead and.
feedback from any proponents as well.
For anybody else that would like to address her comments.
I think that is a friendly amendment. The part about the technical education and the course transferring, I think that you're absolutely right. The messaging needs to be correct. We wouldn't do that for Senate Bill 155 classes. This would be sort of something that is technical in nature, but not 155 eligible. But this sounds like a friendly amendment, and I don't think the Senate will have a problem with it either.
Okay. And again, I would think, my plan would be to work this bill next week, so we have some time to get that language done and get it sent out to the committee, so.
I appreciate it. I wanted to make sure that all the
Yeah, no, it's good to let proponents know so that if there is feedback, they can get to you directly, even as you work with Nick.
Thank you.
Further comments or questions from the committee? Well, seeing none, I would tell the committee that it is my intent to work this next week. So as soon as we get a possible amended balloon language, we'll get that out to you so you can be looking at that also. Without further comments or questions, we had no other opponents. And is there anybody else that would like to speak today on Senate Bill 32? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close the hearing. Thank you for all those who've testified, and it's my goal to get this kicked out of committee next week. Let's go ahead and move on to Senate Bill 64, and we'll let Nick give an overview. Thank you, Nick.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So Senate Bill 64, committee, this is a fairly technical bill, and it's fairly large bill, but I'm going to just hit the high points, and I'm sure the Board of Regents representatives as well will be there to supplement this kind of cursory overview. So what this bill does, it amends the Kansas Private and Out-of-State Post-Secondary Educational Institution Act, basically to clarify the State Board of Regents' authority over private and out-of-state institutions, and allow for additional student protections and institutional accountability. So I'll just run through these sections in the bill just real quick. So new section 1 would allow an institution that is currently exempt from the Private and Out-of-State Post-Secondary Educational Institution Act to apply to the State Board of Regents for a certificate of approval if it is required for the institution to be eligible to receive Title IV funding. New section 2 would require a certificate of approval to be issued to the owner of the institution and not be transferable. And then it would provide requirements regarding how to change ownership and how that certificate would transfer. New section 3 would provide that if an institution is placed into receivership, the receiver shall notify the State Board of Regents and would require the receiver to comply with the act. New section 4 would allow the State Board of Regents to assess a civil fine against an institution for violations of the Kansas Private and Out-of-State Post-Secondary Educational Institution Act. And the fines are listed in the bill. So for a first violation, up to 1% of the institution's tuition revenue. And then for any subsequent violation, up to 2% of the institution's tuition revenue. And there's caps on those fines as well. So Section 5, those were all new sections that would go into this act. Section 5 provides a citation of the act. Section 6 amends some definitions. The main new definition would be a provisional certificate, and there's a later section that discusses these provisional certificates. Section 7 would specifically exempt education offered as an intensive review course that's designed solely to prepare students for graduate or professional school entrance exams or professional licensure from the act. And it would also list out the specific institutions that are exempt from this Private and Out-of-State Post-Secondary Educational Institution Act. These institutions are currently exempt. This would just provide a listing of them. Section 8 would require the State Board of Regents to adopt rules and regulations that impose certain requirements on any institution that is closing. And these include notice requirements, refund requirements, maintenance of records, and transcripts. Additionally, it would require degree granting institutions that are not yet accredited to make progress towards accreditation status. Section 9 would clarify that an institution shall not establish a physical presence in Kansas unless it has obtained a certificate of approval under this act. And Section 10 deals with the certificate of approval applications and how the institution has to notify the State Board of Regents and how the State Board of Regents issues, as I said previously, these provisional certificates of approval to an institution. Additionally, State Board could adopt rules and regulations imposing additional requirements relating to surety bonds and indemnification for any student for losses as a result of failure to receive full accreditation for one of these institutions. Section 11 would add to the list of minimum standards an institution must meet to be awarded a certificate of approval. And those standards are listed in Section 11. Section 12 would relate to a certificate of approval, application, and renewal processes. Section 13 would relate to how refusal to issue a certificate of approval and how an institution could appeal that decision or request a hearing on that decision. And Section 14 would relate to revocation or conditions of a certificate of approval that the State Board could impose or could revoke. Section 16 deals with surety bonds. And as I said, those surety bonds that the Board of Regents could require these institutions to have. Section 17 deals with prohibited acts, and this would prohibit fraud or misrepresentation to obtain a certificate of approval, and it would allow the Board of Regents to revoke a certificate if there is a violation. Section 18 would increase the maximum civil penalty for intentional acts under this act from $5,000 to $20,000. And Section 19 would strike some existing language that would be included in other sections of this act and in this bill relating to fees. And Section 20 would require that any monies received pursuant to this act by the Board of Regents be credited to the Private and Out-of-State Post-Secondary Educational Institution Fee Fund unless that money's credited to the State General Fund pursuant to what it says in new Section 4 or any other fund provided for under the act. And then Section 21 would state that an institution would be in violation of the act for failure to submit complete and substantially accurate data on a timely basis when requested by this State Board of Regents. And the effective date of this bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book. And I will mention that the Senate, what happened in the Senate on this is that the Senate put this bill on the consent calendar and it passed on a vote of 39-0. And I'd be happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Nick. I know there's a lot of information, a lot of sections, and I know we have two proponents that are going to speak to the bill, but if you could just summarize, even with the expanded authority for the Board of Regents, what's the peanut? What's driving the need for this bill?
That I might let the Board of Regents summarize. Really, it's just
Okay.
kind of updating the Private and Out-of-State Educational Institution Act. And
Okay.
I might let the Board of Regents summarize kind of in their
Okay.
words that thought.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Further questions for Nick? Seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to our two proponents. First up is Crystal Puderbaugh. Hope I got that correct.
That's correct. Thank you.
All right. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. And just to answer your question, the main reason for these proposed amendments is that the bill has not had a full workover, or not the bill, the statute, and had full workover for several years. And so this was to just bring it into alignment with current national state practices and to update language and to increase some areas where maybe the language needed to be strengthened. So that was what kind of brought this along. But I thank you for going over each step of it. There are a lot of different sections that are being amended, but before I get into some of those amendments, I do just want to clarify to make sure that everybody understands that we're talking about the institutions that the board has regulatory authority over, which are the private and out-of-state institutions operating in Kansas. This does not impact the state's 6 state universities or any of the community or technical colleges. We're talking more about institutions such as Grantham University and Rasmussen University, and smaller institutions such as Heartland Welding and Apex CDL training. And it also does not apply to the private nonprofit institutions known as the independent institutions such as Baker University. These are the institutions that's had a long history in Kansas and are not under the authority of the board. They have been and will continue to be exempt from this act. And Senate Bill 64 actually, as was stated before, provides an update to clarify the names and list those names of those institutions out specifically so that they can specifically be exempted from the act. But under current law, the private and out-of-state institutions that are wishing to operate in Kansas must first obtain a board-issued certificate of approval. And to qualify for the certificate of approval, an institution submits a lot of information. It's a significant amount of documentation that the institution provides to our office, and we review each document to make sure that it meets minimum standards established by the Act. And once an institution receives a certificate of approval, it must submit an annual renewal application to document continued compliance. Over the past 10 years, the private post-secondary industry has experienced significant changes, such as the proliferation of online education, volatility in ownership structures, and financial stability of some institutions. There's also been school closures that have left students with few options to continue or to transfer their education. So Senate Bill 64 would amend several provisions to align it with, like I said, the national best practices and to enhance enforcement mechanisms to facilitate compliance with the Act. And as previously was mentioned, Senate Bill 64 will assist those institutions that are seeking to remain eligible for Title IV federal financial aid. The federal government requires any institution seeking Title IV eligibility to offer students federal financial aid that they be legally authorized to provide educational programs within the state. So this new Section 1 of the bill will allow those institutions that are exempt from the Act to seek approval from the Board of Regents for the purposes of participating in Title IV student aid. Additionally, as was mentioned, Section 7 is to ensure that institutions are not unnecessarily there's not duplicate oversight. So the Act will not apply if an institution is actively regulated by another regulatory agency in Kansas. It was mentioned that there is a new definition of a provisional certificate of approval. We did notify institutions that would clearly be impacted by this proposed change, including the Kansas Health Science Center, which is a new osteopathic medicine school located in Wichita. Kansas Health Science Center is currently in the process of obtaining accreditation and therefore will be impacted by the proposed provisional certificate of approval status. We have worked with this institution and have incorporated some of their suggested language. We also spoke with their accreditor to ensure that these changes will not impact the school's ability to continue operating or achieve accreditation. Overall, there are a few issues with institutions operating in Kansas, but I want to highlight how a strengthened act could prevent or could have prevented or better handled a couple of situations with institutions operating in Kansas. In March of 2015, Wright Career College, a degree-granting institution operating in Overland Park, was notified of its upcoming annual renewal application due date of May 20th. However, they did not submit the renewal application until July. And then a few months later, students and faculty arrived to class only to find the doors were locked and a sign posted that the school was closed. The students were not provided any teach-out options and that would have allowed them to transfer and continue their education. They were also not provided student records, which meant they were unable to validate their education. The proposed amendment in Senate Bill 64 would require institutions to provide the board with plans for teaching out students and maintaining student records when a renewal application is deemed late. This will allow us to work with an institution to facilitate a smooth transition if the school were to close. Another situation involves a non-degree school. Current law requires institutions to submit valid financial statements. However, upon review of the financial documents submitted by this particular school, I questioned the validity of the statements. And after a lot of back and forth, the school provided us with audited financial statements, which confirmed that the originally submitted documents were in fact not accurate. We were able to rectify this situation and get accurate information and provide a certificate, a renewed certificate, which was in the best interest of the students since this was an administrative issue and not an instructional issue. However, the school was not held accountable for providing misrepresented documents. Senate Bill 64 would add using fraud or misrepresentation to obtain a certificate of approval as a violation of the act and provide the board with the ability to assess fines for the violations of the act. The ability to condition or fine an institution provides the board a progressive discipline process to gain compliance, rather than moving straight to revocation, which would cause more harm in many cases to students. As I said, most of the schools operating in Kansas are doing what they are supposed to and are in compliance, but the proposed amendments put measures in place to ensure the state is prepared if there is an issue with a school providing education to Kansas students. The written testimony goes into each one of the sections more in detail, and Nick provided a great overview, but I think the amendments can fall into three categories. They clarify the board's authority, they strengthen consumer protections, and increase institutional accountability. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All questions. Next up is Matt Lindsay. Welcome back, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Lindsay, Kansas Independent College Association, here in support of Senate Bill 64. As you heard from Nick, as well as Crystal, this has some welcome changes for the not-for-profit colleges in the state. So we are exempt from the Private and Out-of-State Post-Secondary Act in mass right now, with a couple of exceptions. This would list each of the nonprofit colleges by name, as well as Crystal noted, provide a process by which we could acquire the necessary documentation to send to the federal United States Department of Education in order to demonstrate we are authorized to operate in the state of Kansas. That opens the door, make sure we have an open door for students at the nonprofit colleges to receive Pell Grants, to receive federal student loans, all those things that come with Title IV federal aid eligibility. So with that, we are highly supportive of this, of the improvements that this brings to the act. Happy to answer questions at the right time.
It is that time. Questions from the committee for either of the two proponents? I'm not seeing anything, and I think this is pretty straightforward. It did pass on the Senate side on consent calendar, and I see no reason why we shouldn't be able to do the same. And so in order to get it on the consent calendar, let's just go ahead. Well, let's go ahead and finish closing up the hearing before we decide to move forward to working it. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak or online? Seeing none, we will go ahead and close the hearing on Senate Bill 64. Okay, Nick, as far as, is there, can you think of any other reason why we wouldn't just go ahead and put this on a consent calendar right now? I mean, I don't want to, I mean, cause problems, but I don't see anything, but I figured it doesn't hurt to ask.
Oh, I think that's the will of your committee, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, committee. I would entertain a motion that we do pass this out and put it on the consent calendar. All right, Representative Murphy makes that motion, and a second from Representative Poskin. Discussion. Pretty straightforward. Appreciate it. It does meet some needs and clarification. Anybody have any comments or concerns? I see a hand. Is that Representative Stockstill?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think these are both excellent bills. I'm glad that we can get these before the House, and I think putting them on the consent committee is certainly a good way to go. I'd support that 100%.
Okay. Without further, oh, Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify that we're just talking about moving out the Senate Bill 64, not both of them.
No. We're going to wait on yours because it has an amendment, and if you amend, you can't go, so. Yes. Yep, we're all on the same page. All right, without further comment or question, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Or aye. All those opposed, say nay. I'm assuming that was just a slow hand there, right, Representative Stockstill? Maybe there's a delay in the, so. All right, the motion does pass. And let's go ahead and we got the time. Let's go ahead and look at Senate Bill 55, which was the Cleveland University bill. And I did find out that our House bill is on the consent calendar over on the Senate side. And so I'm thinking that if we kick it out with even just a small tweak, it'll be below the line. And then it'll, if necessary, it'll be available as a vehicle that could be used. Sometimes that's necessary for leadership. And if we do this, it just makes it easier for that to proceed. But it is my firm understanding that based on where we're at, that the bill will become law after, the delays from last year. But I would like to at least take this step. And Nick, what would be, what's the date? What would we change? Is it the publication and statute? Is that what it is now? Or, what's your recommendation on changing something in a way that would allow us to proceed in this way?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yes, the bill, Senate Bill 55 currently would take effect upon publication in the statute book. I don't know if I can provide a specific recommendation on that, but oftentimes committees will change something. Oftentimes that is the effective date going from statute book to register to force the other side, the Senate, to take a look at it.
Okay. Well, committee, I would like to pursue that. So, Representative Thomas, you want to make that motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that we make the conceptual motion to change the date of the statute to the date of the register.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Representative Sanders is seconding. Discussion on this. I know we talked about this a little bit last week. So I'm glad that our House bill will be the one that moves forward and gets signed, but this is still a good thing for us to do as a committee. And discussion or comments before we make the motion, and then we'll move after we make the motion to kicking the bill out. Seeing none, let's go ahead and vote on the motion to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Yes, the ayes do have it. All right, well, now that we've amended the bill, let's go ahead and you want to make the motion to kick it out as amended?
Yes, I move that the committee pass out Senate Bill 55 as amended favorably.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Representative Collins seconds. Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, we're just having a delay there. The motion does pass. All right. One more bill, and Senate Bill 62 was the bill we heard on vision tests last week. And I did talk to Nick about balloon language, and has that already been handed out to the committee? And I don't have my... Nick, what was the House bill number? Was it 2078? I'm trying to remember. The emergency medicine bill?
Believe, I'm going to pull it up right now. I believe it was 2086.
2086, okay. And, you know, that was a bill that I felt like had some good things in it. There were questions, and even with liability, there was questions and concerns that came up that I kind of felt like were under the purview of maybe a judiciary committee. But I know that they're already able to do what they're doing, but the one issue that came up in talking with several people was that there's two drugs, and one was in statute and one wasn't. And this balloon language, all it's doing is making sure that in the statute that both drugs are listed in statute, which I think would be beneficial based on the comments that I'd heard. And so that's the intent with including that into Senate Bill 62. I felt like it was a good topic with both being health related with our schools to do that. And with that, I would allow maybe my vice chair, if you wanted to make that motion to do this balloon language as an amendment to Senate Bill 62.
Refresh my memory. I'm making a motion to amend, or am I
Yes.
making a motion to pass out?
Well, no, right now, we're just going to make the, to amend 62 with the balloon language that's been presented.
Okay, well, then I have a balloon amendment, and the language has been passed out. If we could get an explanation of the amendment?
Yeah, let Nick go ahead and make sure. I briefly talked to it. I just want to make sure that I didn't misspeak on any of that and that you could clarify, But let's go ahead and let's just go ahead and make the motion, and then we'll get into discussing it before we would work it. So you made the motion to amend Senate Bill 62 with the balloon language that's been presented. Is there a second from the committee? Representative Poskins seconds. Now that we have a motion and a second, Nick, I just wanted to make sure that, that I did explain that correctly. So I'll let you just quickly go over the balloon language as it amends Senate Bill 62.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, and I believe you all in the committee room have it, and I'm going to share my screen as well with this balloon. Okay. So committee, what this does, this balloon, as the chair said, would place albuterol within the current statutory scheme that exists for schools to maintain supplies of epinephrine. It really just places albuterol into that same statutory scheme and authorizes schools to maintain, in addition to what they are currently authorized to maintain, the epinephrine kits, also authorizes them to maintain albuterol kits. and to administer albuterol in emergency situations in the same way that they can administer epinephrine. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And I just wanted to make sure, refresh my memory. It was my understanding that this was already being done, but I felt like this would clarify statute in a way that was beneficial. But I just wanted to help you remind me, even, that was kind of a summary of the testimony we heard last month. So, Nick, that was my memory, but I just thought you might, make sure that I'm remembering that correctly. Representative Sanders, did you have a question or comment?
Well, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think albuterol is currently being stocked at the schools. I think when we had this hearing originally, that albuterol would be added. Okay. I don't recall that it was currently being stocked. I think that's one of the things the proponents of that bill wanted to do.
Was it optional? Could they stock it now? And I thought that was maybe one of the questions that, did you have a comment?
I concur with Representative Sanders. The albuterol is new. Epinephrine they can do now, but the albuterol was new. Okay.
And for some reason I was thinking that some schools were already, no, okay. But I do think that this is, Representative Murphy, did you have a question or a comment?
Well, I just going to clarify. I think a lot of schools have it, but it's the parent that brings it and keeps it there for the child, for their child.
Okay. I just remembered it was being utilized, and I thought to update the statutes this way would be beneficial. Further questions or comments? Representative Featherston.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate you bringing forth this amendment. I heard from a lot of school nurses who thought it was really important to get this albuterol added on, and I really appreciate you and the revisor going to the work of getting this added to this amendment, or this bill. I think it's a great amendment.
Further questions or comments? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a problem with who's allowed to administer this. This can be a dangerous drug, and I think that somebody who just has been taken a test to be certified isn't fully trained, and if they make a misdiagnosis, and they're not a trained person, so I would think that would be a reasonable possibility. I have a problem with this amendment, and we never actually voted on the other bill, but I would have voted no.
Well, and again, I'm trying to do this in a way that is not changing how it's currently being administered, and that's through school nurses. And that, the rest of the bill, as far as, the other things that could come into play as far as training and passing on that authority is not in this amendment.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I think Section 3, Paragraph B.
I'll have Nick, can you clarify that? Because it really wasn't my intent to change, who was administering other than school nurses. But could you clarify in the balloon language that question?
Yeah, so certainly. So what this balloon is doing and I believe you're looking at page 3, subsection B of that amendatory language. That language is essentially mirroring what currently exists in statute for epinephrine. And that is the same language that's used in current statute, but it's applying it for albuterol.
But it's not changing that only who is currently allowed to administer, which is the school nurses. It's not changing that, is it?
It's not making any changes to anything dealing with epinephrine and the administration of epinephrine, and it's placing the albuterol onto the same exact legal footing as epinephrine is currently in state law.
Okay. Go ahead, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Nick, individuals other than the school nurse could, if this amendment is passed, could administer the albuterol, correct?
I'm not, there is a provision to,
I guess I'm looking at section 2, paragraph
yes.
3, subsection B.
So,
And if I'm saying all that correctly.
yeah, so all the blue language is new language, and the blue underline is new, and the black language is current law. This again is putting albuterol within that same legal within the same legal standing as epinephrine. So whoever is able to administer epinephrine under current law, and whoever's doing it under current law, the same thing is going to apply to albuterol.
And that means that somebody other than a school nurse could administer albuterol.
I don't.
It says here.
Well, and that, go ahead and clarify that. I don't think that wasn't my intent, and I just wanted to make sure that the language is clear in regards that we're not changing that.
We're not changing anything from what happens in current law. I believe the provisions of House Bill 2086 were making some changes with regard to training requirements and who can administer the medication. And with regard to how they're receiving training, and those designated officials that can administer that, or I shouldn't say receive, who can administer the medication. This amendment does not contain any of those provisions. So whatever, I guess, the school policy is for the administration of epinephrine would apply to albuterol as well.
Representative Estes.
I have some concerns about this. Number one, we were told we're probably not going to work this bill, so the parents who were engaged in this conversation, that's what I in good faith told to them. And freshman lesson learned. But there are some issues with the bill that I have concerns with as well. Perhaps we could use the vehicle you just created to, or maybe we don't even need one because this is a standalone bill, and take these as two separate issues. And overall, I like the bill. I came in hesitant to it, but I think there's some serious conversations that we want to have, and I hate to tie up the other bill with this bill.
Well, the other bill wasn't blessed, and so, it's no longer available. I did feel like this was a good compromise, not to change the liability issues or anybody other than the nurses. I didn't want to get into the training and all those other things, but just to have both drugs in statute, because that was the one issue that came back to me by several people that wasn't in statute, but it could be done even, I think, through parents working with the school nurse. And so I thought it clarified statute in a way to at least address that one issue. And so that was my intent in trying to have compromise without getting into the full context of the previous 2086 in a way that there was some of the controversy. And if, at the end of the day, the committee is not comfortable with that, then I appreciate that there were comments and concerns back when we had the hearing. And so that's, even now as we work on balloon language, is another chance to have that discussion. And,
And I don't want to kill the bill, but, so I guess it's speak now or we all hold our peace.
Well, and again, even if we do kick this out and we can, there's many steps in the process that goes to the floor, and, there's no guarantee we come above the line, but we can even follow up with, people as far as that did testify in the previous bill. If we do work it and then it goes over to the Senate, it's getting late in the session, but, as far as would they have time even at this point in time to hear it if we passed it on the House floor. We have a 2-year cycle, so if there's anything that would come up with questions or concerns, even that might be raised on the floor, there's many steps in the process that are still left to go. But it was my thought, based on a bill that with the vision test, that this was something that could accompany And if we just simply were putting in the language of it being in statute like the other drug, that it would take care of a lot of the concerns that came up in testimony and in comments and questions that followed. So, I'm not trying to, do anything other than present the opportunity to the committee, and I will, gladly allow the committee to voice its pleasure or displeasure by voting yes or no when we get to that point. So let's see, we had some other people for Representative Murphy, and then I saw two more hands that I want to get on the list.
No, pretty well, it's pretty well been said. I'm the same way. I'm uncomfortable with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Representative Clark.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I don't think I could vote for this bill the way the balloon is written right now, because right here on subsection B, it says any person who graciously and in good faith renders emergency care treatment through the administration of epinephrine or albuterol.
Okay.
It's not a school nurse.
Well, and again, that was my intent, that there would be school nurses. I tell you what, just to make sure, because it's a valid question, Nick, I think I might table the discussion, and let's just make sure that as far as the balloon language, before we would get to that point, we still have time next week to have further discussion. But, and again, Nick, I think I'll give you one more chance. I mean, you knew what my intent was. And again, I wasn't trying to expand who could, deliver, but I did want to have both drugs and statute in a way that school nurses could. And so,
Mr. Chairman, I think possibly a conceptual motion is in order to could be in order to fix that and simply add language that says specifically a school nurse certified would be the only one allowed to administer the albuterol. I think that might.
It might. Nick, what do you think about even if we, just made that change to clarify? Because that was my intent. And if you could think of how we could clarify that right now in a way that the committee would be agreeable to, that would be helpful.
Certainly, if the committee wants to go that direction to require within that subsection or another section that school nurses shall only be the ones to administer albuterol, we could go off a conceptual amendment of that. Again, I will state that this is putting the albuterol into the same legal boat as epinephrine. So whoever's administering epinephrine is the same ones that can do albuterol. But we can certainly clarify that albuterol and set specifics for albuterol if the committee chooses to go that way.
It sounds like that would be beneficial. So, let's go ahead and make a substitute to the motion to clarify that.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I have substitute motion. I move that we add the balloon language into Senate Bill 62 with an additional language, a conceptual motion to add language that only allows a certified school nurse to administer the albuterol.
All right, and Representative Estes is seconding that. All right, and again, there's no rush. If you want to wait, we can, but I felt comfortable doing this, and so further discussion as far as the substitute motion. Does that answer concerns for some of the Representative Sanders, Representative Clark?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would still be in favor of what you mentioned just a minute ago, which is to table this amendment for now, give the reviser a chance to put the new language into the bill, and then take a look at it, because I didn't really come here today prepared to talk about this.
That's fair.
And so I would prefer that this be tabled and not acted on today.
Okay. Representative Featherston.
Thank you. Regarding the change, I think we have a lot of grade schools, especially that don't have a full-time nurse. So are we going to let a kid die potentially because the trained staff can't administer albuterol? Second, I phoned a friend while we were here. My husband is an emergency room physician. So he's trained in worst case scenario. And I said, how dangerous is albuterol? Like, is there a way you can hurt yourself with it? He said, no, a child can administer it. And we're talking about puffers. That's what albuterol is. A child can administer it, especially if they have the aero chamber. That's also called a spacer. And so then I said, is there a standard dose from child to child? Does each kid have separate prescriptions? No. The dosage is a standard 1 puff or 2 puff. And I said, could somebody or a child be harmed if they don't have asthma and are given the puffer or the inhaler? And he says, no. As far as I know, it should really only be used in someone that's having reactive airway issue, which would be respiratory distress that we're discussing. Some people with an allergy type reaction could potentially benefit without having a history of asthma. Most kids aren't going to need it unless they actually have asthma. So this is not a dangerous drug.
And again, I appreciate all those comments. I do feel like I said, I'm not trying to rush anything today. I'm not trying to catch anybody off guard, and I can already tell that that is the case. And I apologize because that was not my intent. I did feel like this was something that would be a compromise and beneficial, but I still want to try to proceed with it. But in order to be fair and for everybody to know exactly what we're doing, and so we can further discuss this without making decisions and making amendments like we did with the substitute language, let's go ahead and I'll have Nick, if you could create the new balloon language and get that to Deborah, and we'll email that out to everybody. And then it would be my intent to next week, I think we're meeting Tuesday and Wednesday, that we could relook at the language we have after everybody's had a chance to review it. And if you have people that you want to have questions or comments or discussions with, we can do that next week. So that way that's as fair as possible so that we can make sure we're doing the right thing. And with that, I am going to, did you have a question, Representative Thomas?
Nick, can we put in that language that, and I know there's about 27 different motions, I apologize. Can we put in there that if a school nurse, licensed school nurse, is not present, that a designee of the school chief officer, like the principal or what have you, that can have a designee instead? That way, if they don't have a nurse, there can be a designee of the school that's able to administer. Can we add that as well?
We certainly could. There's, some provisions of House Bill 2086, the original bill was providing for designated school personnel to administer emergency medication. So that language could be pulled over from the original bill, I guess, in those situations.
And if you want to, I'm willing to, to get the substitute balloon language in a way that everybody can be reviewing it and looking at so that we can discuss it next week. So I'll let you make that addition to your substitute. And do you?
Mr. Chair, I had a question.
Okay, just a second. We'll go ahead and do that and I'll get to questions.
I think the other representative raised a good point about not having enough school nurses. That was something that I hadn't considered. So I'm one of those people who needs time to think about it. If a child needs it, I want it to be available. I don't want to kill this bill, but I want to honor some of the concerns of the conferees.
Well, and again, I think we can do that even with this substitute motion, and then we'll have a full discussion next week.
Mr. Chairman, would there be any way possible to withdraw this amendment for now and then get the new language and then make a motion for another
in order to get
amendment?
the new language, I think we're going to settle on the substitute, and then that way he can get it out. And then if we, in discussion, if things come up that we still want to continue to pursue, we can do that next week. And so that'll give anybody and everybody the chance to, to discuss with any constituent or anybody else or, on possible suggestions when we look at this next week. But I think we do have that substitute language, and the second agreed to it. So Nick, if you could go ahead and rewrite the balloon and then get that to Deborah, and we'll get it out to the committee. We'll table it for now, and then we will reconsider our actions next week after we have a chance to look at the revised balloon language. Any other questions before we wrap up today? I think Representative Stogg still had a question. Representative Stogg still? We can't hear you. You're muted. We think you're muted. Can you unmute?
There we go.
Jerry? All right.
Yeah.
We can
I
hear
was
you.
just going to say, I wanted to commend the chair for including this language today. This is life-saving stuff here. And I know because our son has a very severe peanut allergy. And before we found out what it was causing the problem, epinephrine saved his life twice. And I worked with the Shawnee Mission School District on peanut allergies, how to treat them, epinephrine, how to administer epinephrine, that sort of thing. And the district did a fantastic job of a training program for school personnel on how to administer epinephrine and albuterol, as a matter of fact. But you have to realize that both of those drugs can be administered by second graders. My son carried epinephrine. He still carries epinephrine with him. And they taught him how to inject himself with that in the second grade. And also, I think maybe when we're looking at this as far as a nurse goes, there is a problem with that because even in school districts like Shawnee Mission, who have a good number of nurses, there's not one for every building. And these are drugs that have to be administered immediately. If there's a child that goes into anaphylactic shock, their chances of saving their life could be measured in minutes. So I think maybe one of the things I'd like to have the group look at is not only a nurse being able to administer these drugs, but maybe, and this is what we did in schools in Shawnee Mission, the nurses held training sessions for the staff on how to administer these drugs, how to do that. So if there's some way to say either a school nurse or a school member of the school personnel that has gone through the training could administer
Jerry,
one of these drugs.
I think we've already gotten the substitute language is going to be sent out that is taking an attempt at that.
Okay.
So we'll
I
send
just
that
wanted to make
language.
sure that it wasn't just the nurse, because that's not enough.
You must have been sleeping for a few minutes there, got
Yeah,
disconnected.
yeah. It's the delay. I'm still getting it, you know.
Yeah, okay.
So,
And again, I don't want to make light, and I do want to be fair to everybody, and this gives a potential balloon language to be discussed next week, and be prepared even after you get your balloon language to look at it, and then be prepared if, to have further discussion next week. So with that, we do have, I'm going to table where we're at right now, get the updated balloon language motion out to everybody, and then we will reconvene this discussion next week. With that, committee, we are adjourned. We're not meeting tomorrow. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday. And enjoy your time off tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 1:30. Thank you, committee.